Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Shaw here, back at it again. This time, we're talking about the Constitution, okay? Constitution was written in 1787. We talked in the last video about the ratification debate, okay? And now we're going to look at what is in this thing that has been governing us for almost 240 years. So, let's get to it. And again, the question here that I have on the right, again, what is the right balance of power and good government? Again, that's really kind of what we're dealing with. That was what we were dealing with the Federalist and Anti-Federalist debate. And to be honest with you, that question has really lingered in many Americans' minds for a very long time. Even today, again, Democrats think that a more powerful government is better. Republicans think that a less powerful government is better. So again, and we'll get to that. We'll talk more about that later. But again, just keep that in mind. That's really what we're dealing with. Okay. So I'm not super worried about you writing all of these down. If you maybe wanted to write the first three, especially. Again, we're going to talk about all this stuff. But just in general, you need to know that the Constitution was written in 1787. And it takes effect in 1789 after 9 out of 13 states ratify it. And then, of course, eventually once the rest of the other 4 states ratify it, we are now officially, the United States of America underneath the Constitution. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, okay? And that is, again, nothing can conflict with the Constitution. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about judicial review. And as I mentioned, this is going to replace the Articles of Confederation. Again, we're getting rid of a weak federal government, and we're replacing it with a strong federal government. Okay? All right. Moving on. So I'm gonna do a quick overview of the legislative branch, just because we're actually going to talk about them more in the next video, and we'll talk about all of their powers and things like that. But for now, let's just focus on the fact that it's a bicameral house or bicameral legislature. That means 2 houses, as you guys already know. You also know that the bicameral nature of the legislature settled the Virginia and New Jersey plans. And the other thing it did is that it splits the power of Congress to prevent it from overwhelming other branches. Okay, again, this is really important here, okay, that if in a unicameral legislature, it's really easy to pass laws, or at least it's easier to pass laws. So if you split the powers, you split the House up, or split the legislature up into 2 houses, it's much more difficult to pass laws, which means that the legislature won't be quite as powerful. Sorry, I had to fix that. It said "and" instead of 2 there for some reason. It was bothering me. All right, so moving on to representation in Congress. Again, nothing to write here. I just kind of wanted to show you kind of how things work out. You see that based on the population of Wyoming and California are vastly different, and this is from 2010. So even this is probably, it's probably grown since then. But every state gets 2 senators. Okay, again, we talked about that being equal representation in the Senate. And then the House members are based on population. So again, for Wyoming, they only have a population of 563,000 people, so they only get 1 House member. So then how they get the number 53 is they divide this number by, I think it's like 800,000 or something like that. And that's how they end up getting, 53 members in the House. Okay, so again, California has the same amount of power in the Senate as Wyoming, but they are significantly more powerful in the House of Representatives. Okay. All right. So moving on to the executive branch, I'm going to go a little bit more in depth here with the executive branch because we're going to talk. We have a whole unit on the president later, but for now, all you need to know is that the executive branch, again, the president's job is to enforce the laws of Congress. The biggest thing is that, again, this was not present under the Articles, okay, and which meant under the Articles that the laws of Congress really didn't mean much of anything. So now, under the Constitution, we have someone to enforce the laws of Congress. And now the laws of Congress are going to, be followed theoretically by everybody in the country. So the president has the power to command armed forces. Again, he's commander-in-chief. He can make treaties with other nations. He can approve or veto acts of Congress. He call special sessions of Congress. Send and receive diplomatic reps. Again, that just means representatives. And then take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Again, if you want to add here that the president is enforcing the law, again, that's his biggest job. Okay, is to make sure that the laws of Congress and the decisions of the Supreme Court are enforced. Okay, and again, he is chosen independently of Congress. Again, we talked about that, again, with the difference between a parliamentary and a presidential democracy. Okay, again, in a parliamentary democracy, the president is chosen from the legislature. But that's not what we have. We have the president chosen by himself, or with the vice president now, but through the Electoral College. Okay, so that's the executive branch. Getting into the judicial branch. So in Article 3, the only court that's actually mentioned is the Supreme Court. And in the Article 3, it gives Congress the power to establish inferior courts or lower courts. So Congress actually establishes the district courts and the appellate courts, but the Supreme Court was actually established by the Constitution. So we're going to go in order here, and I'm just going to start with the lowest court, and I'm going to go up. Again, we have an entire unit on the judicial branch, so this is just not I just kind of wanted to give you a quick overview, and then we'll move on from there. So again, the district courts, this is like your traditional, like you think like Law and Order, like the court systems that you guys see. That is what is really happening in the district courts. So they hear cases involving the federal law and the Constitution. And then the next level, again, if you lose your case at the district court, you can appeal your decision to the appellate court, and they are going to hear cases appealed to them from district courts. Nice and easy. And then the Supreme Court, they have, again, this is the highest court in the land. As I mentioned, it is the only court established in the Constitution. They have two really big roles. The biggest role is to hear cases appealed to them from the appellate courts and then state Supreme Courts, but also they resolve any disputes between states that may pop up. But again, there's a lot of other things that we're not going to get into quite yet because, like I said, we have a whole nother unit on them later on. Okay, that is the judicial branch. All right, so let's get into the basic principles of the Constitution. So again, you don't have to write this out like you see it here. You guys can just write it, like you normally would. But I would definitely get basic principles, and then these three. I have more coming, so just know that that's coming down the line. So we've already talked about most of these. The first one is popular sovereignty. So popular sovereignty is the idea that the political power resides in the people. And that, of course, if someone doesn't if the government is not doing their job, like the people have the right to overthrow them or to remove them. Again, if you think about somebody like, somebody who represents you in the House of Representatives, for example, if they don't do a good job, every 2 years you get the opportunity to vote them out. And you can replace them with someone different. So again, that's the idea of popular sovereignty, okay, is that the people are the ones with the true power. The government they govern on behalf of the people, but we are the ones with the true power. So number 2 is limited government. Again, we talked about that. Again, government may only do things that the people have given it the power to do. Specifically here, the limited government is just the idea that the government is restricted. Okay, it can't do everything that it wants to, and specifically, our government is restricted by the Constitution. That is what limits the power of the government. It says you can do these things, but nothing else. It's also known as constitutionalism. I'm not really worried about you knowing that. Rule of law, though, is really important to know, and rule of law. I would actually add this here. Hang on one second. Sorry about that. So what I did was I'm going to add. I'm going to make a basic principles one afterward to just go over rule of law because that is its own thing. But I'll finish this up and then we'll go talk about rule of law. Okay, so anyway, limited government, as I said, only government is restricted in what it can do. Number 3 is separation of powers. Again, we've talked about this. The idea, it was Montesquieu's idea that 3 branches again, you're splitting up the powers so that no one branch is going to be able to be too powerful and overtake the others. Again, kind of going back to bicameralism a little bit. Separation there is going to kind of split the powers and make each one less likely to be able to rise up and take power from the other ones. Okay, so as I mentioned with rule of law, kind of related to limited government, but the idea here is there's really 3 parts to rule of law. Everyone must obey the law, no one is above the law, and even the government must obey the law. Again, in a limit, the reason why this was paired with limited government is because it really does limit the government literally. And if you think of an unlimited government, that it's not, the government doesn't necessarily have to obey the law. That was one of the biggest problems in the Declaration of Independence was that they were saying that King George has refused to follow his own laws. So again, this is really important in a limited democracy, just because you have to. The law has to be consistent. The law has to be predictable. Okay, and everybody needs to be held to the same standard. Okay. Next up is checks and balances. Again, you know that checks and balances are restraints on other branches. I don't know if I really need you guys to get this whole thing. It's probably not a bad idea. Let's go ahead and go through it real quick, just because I think that this is going to be a pretty, I don't really have too much else to talk about. So what I would do is I would just go ahead and draw this out. Again, you have the executive branch, legislative branch, and judicial branch. If you want to do it, in a triangle form, if that's easier, that's fine too. But let's go ahead and let's start with just the executive branch. So the executive branch has checks against the legislative branch. He can veto legislation. He can call special sessions of Congress. Okay. Again, he also has checks against the judicial branch, and he appoints Supreme Court justices and appoints all federal justices. So in turn, okay, the legislative branch has checks against the executive. And so the legislative branch can override a president's veto with a 2/3 vote. They can impeach the president. The Senate approves appointments of judges and also approves treaties. Okay, and so the legislative branch, that's how the legislative branch keeps the president in check. And then also the legislative branch can impeach federal judges. I'm sorry, so these are checks against the judicial branch now. They can impeach federal judges, and they also have the power to create lower courts. I would also add here that they approve of the justices, because that's a way to kind of keep them in check as well. And the judicial branch is actually really easy. They can declare acts of Congress unconstitutional, okay, to keep Congress in check, and they can declare acts of the president unconstitutional to keep the president in check. So that's pretty easy. That's actually called judicial review, which is going to be on the next slide, I believe. But anyway, I would just get this down just because it's going to be really helpful for you later, but we'll talk more about that in class. Okay, there, as I mentioned, judicial review is next. This is the power of a court to determine the constitutionality of a government action. Again, literally, it is the ability to declare things unconstitutional. Nothing can conflict with the Constitution, guys. Again, if it does, the Supreme Court will rule it unconstitutional, okay, and that law or act is nullified. Okay, it can't exist if it conflicts with the Constitution. We'll talk more about that later. The next principle is federalism. Again, you guys know what a federal government is. Again, we know that this is division of power among a central government and several regional governments. Specifically, we call those regional governments state governments. And again, we have, and this is going to allow us to have federal powers like national government powers, state powers, and then shared powers. I'm not going to get too much more into that just because that's the focus of our entire next video. But just know that federalism is one of our principles. Okay, and then I think this is the last part here. The last part is we need to be able, the Constitution needs to be flexible. Okay, we need to, it needs to be able to kind of change and adapt over time, and that is what, again, a lot of people call it a living document. Okay, we want it to be able to change and adapt as the times change. Okay, so an amendment is just a change or addition in the written words of the Constitution. Okay, the formal amendment process is outlined in Article 5. And it sets two methods of ratification or formal approval of amendments. Again, the word ratify, as we talked about in class, just means approve. It's just a fancy word for approve. Okay, so the last thing here, I believe this is last. Sorry, yes, that is the last thing. For amending the Constitution, again, there's two methods. I would go ahead and write this. You don't have to write all of the like thumbs up and thumbs down. Just write the text with some of the arrows, and I think that you'll be fine. You'll notice that these are actually the same. Like that, both of these are the same options. Okay, so again, these are really just the only two things that are different. So let's talk about method one first. So method one is an amendment is proposed by Congress by a 2/3 vote in each house. So both in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, 2/3 of those congressmen have to agree that this should be an amendment. After that, they have two ways to ratify it. The first way is for 3/4 of the state legislatures to ratify it, to approve of it. Okay, again, and they just need a majority vote for that, but you need, I think, like something like 38 states to approve of that in order for that to become a new amendment. The last one that's actually never been used is that it can be ratified by conventions in 3/4 of the states. Okay, again, this has never been used, but it is still an option. So again, you notice that the ratification part is the same over here, as I mentioned. Method 2 is when something is, for proposal anyway, is to propose it at a national convention that is called by Congress when requested by 2/3 of the state legislatures. Again, this has only been used one time, and that was specifically with, excuse me, I think it's with the 21st Amendment, or maybe this one's never been used. Sorry, I always get them confused. I think it's, I want to say it's this one. Yeah, so this one was, this one's always been used. This right here has never been used. This ratification method has only been used once, and that was with the 21st Amendment, which repealed the prohibition of alcohol. Okay. Anyway, so again, this is another option that, like I said, has never been used, but it could be used if they wanted to. And then, as I said, they have the two methods to ratify. Okay. Again, make sure you guys get this. We'll talk about this more in class, but you want to make sure you know how the Constitution is amended. I don't really care for you guys to have this. I actually meant to delete this, so don't worry about it. Okay, guys, I appreciate you. Okay, I'll see you in the next video.